Hi, I'm Mike Zaida, and today's presentation is entitled 20 Columns Later. I'm going to share my slides. There it is. Share. And put it on play. Cool. 20 columns later. This is the 13th of August, 2024. And this is my 21st games column for IEEE Computer, and it's time to review my motivations for writing each past column and provide any responses that I've received. So you can see this giant mind map of 20 columns starting in the upper right where it says, why did I say yes to writing this bi-monthly column? And wrapping all the way around to the latest one that has gone into the production process called generative AI changes the world, maybe. All right. So in a weak moment in June of 2021, I told the editor of IEEE Computer that I would write a games column every other month for the foreseeable future. In my mind, knowing that if I ran out of ideas or words, that I could just ignore any and all emails from the IEEE staff and plead ignorance, laziness, or some other excuse, and no one would care, as who was going to read these columns anyway, is what I was thinking. I needed to turn in the first column in June of 2021 for publication in the September 2021 issue of IEEE Computer. Notice I said yes in the same month as the column was due. And I was thinking September 21 is a long way off, and then I realized that I need to write something immediately. I had no idea what to write. So I started with the title, Why Did I Say Yes to Writing This Bi-Monthly Column? Cursing myself for taking on this additional burden to my quiet life. So once I had the title, I then thought I should try and come up with ideas that might be good for future columns. So I stuffed as many of those ideas into that first column so I would have listed somewhere the great titles I came up with so that I wouldn't have to come up with new ideas the week before the next column was due, which is always a bad idea. When I took on this role, I was thinking maybe most of the work I would do was to look for other potential column authors and invite them to this never-ending story so that I could weasel out of so much writing, or at least find someone I could co-author with whose emails I could ignore once the column handoff was tasked. Well, 20 single author columns later, I couldn't even make that happen. I did have one helper slash proofreader and attorney for the column entitled Patent Litigation in the Game Space, where I wanted to teach our dear readers how to think about drafting patents in the game space such that they were useful in litigation, as opposed to being less than fully useless. One of the categories we used to have for rating professors that worked inside the United States federal government at a previous place of employ. So forward to a backward-looking column. I will start with each column's title and try and explain any response I received on that column and what was my motivation for writing that column. And first, though, the IEEE computer audience is made up of computer scientists, electrical engineers, and computer engineers from the entire span of those fields. These dear readers are not all in the games industry, so the goal is to draft columns that are interesting about games and game technologies and culture, somewhat technical, though without equations. If you are interested in drafting a guest column, please send me the draft title and abstract, and I will respond immediately if it looks excellent for Computer Magazine. I'm trying to fill in the alternate months with guest columns. So in the months I'm not writing, I would like you to have guest columns. So please look at my past columns for examples on what I am looking for. Think 2,000 words, 4 to 5 illustrations or images, and go to mikezaida.com/IEEE computer with a space in between there for examples of previously published columns to see the style of writing and what we need from you if you decide to say yes to my column acceptance. Now on with any responses that I've received and my responses to those responses, if any. So first column, why did I say yes to writing this bi-monthly column? The abstract for this column says it all. The games column is a new bi-monthly column in Computer, and the focus of this column is on new technology in and around the development of games. And I'm a computer scientist, and my interests are in the development of new technologies that can be deployed in games. So that column tries to explain how the games industry really does not do any research, just little r, but lots of development, big D. It also explains how little the research that gets done inside of universities supports the future technologies required for games. Most research funding obtainable inside of universities focuses on something directly deployable for the warfighter and or small projects thought up by whatever research program manager is on rotation for whatever funding agency, with that program manager and university faculty usually believing that all the technology for games has been invented and nothing more needs to be invented, which is definitely not true. In that column, I introduced some of the technologies that I was thinking about as potential future column ideas. So my motivation for creating that column was to maybe spark interest and discussion on the development of new technologies for the games industry and interest in perhaps the creation of a new research laboratory with game and game technology development at its focus. In this very first column, I decided that the only way people would read these columns is if I provided a provocative title along with the YouTube of each column so that very busy people could get access to the contents earlier than the 65 plus days it takes for IEEE to typeset and proof each column. The YouTube channel now has 12,000 plus subscribers, and IEEE sends out each column in digital and paper form to over 100,000 subscribers some 2 months after the YouTube goes online. I did not receive any written responses from anyone when this column came out, just a few suggestions that said just that I just say no via a backdated email. All right. I kept saying yes, though. All right. Column number 2. Will I see sensor-based games happen before I die? In this, the second games column, we look at the possibility of developing sensor-based games. And we do this from a high level, pointing out that all the pieces exist, but have not yet been put together. The motivation for this column was to propose putting together sensors that could be used to determine human physical, emotion, and mental state, and plug those determined states into an AI system that could interact with humans. The form of the AI proposed was to be AI characters that would have authored personalities and have the ability to take in the physical, emotion, and mental states of the humans and interact appropriately based on the AI's personality and goals and strategies. Figure 2 is a nice high-level architecture on what I was proposing. I'm not going to talk through the illustrations. They're just there to sort of point you at what I was thinking in this paper. These are all directly from the columns. The origin of my motivation was that I was an advisor for 7 years to a startup, MSense, that had developed a low-cost hybrid EEG device that could be manufactured for about $50 that could determine the emotion state of the human wearing the device. It was originally designed to be an input device for game consoles, but the response from the games industry was that it could not be used in development until that device automatically came with every console sold. So this is another issue for a different column, but the deployment of newly developed game technology is something of a chicken and egg problem. The game industry wants it already to be out there and shipped, and then they'll think about building for it, which is very hard for a startup that comes up with new technology. So no written response in this column, but some very nice discussions with Kaiser Kaderi, MD, director of Stanford University's Human Perception Laboratory. Kaiser and I have had on and off discussions about sensor-based games since January 2005. This is a long time. And the focus of the Stanford lab is exactly on everything we do. We believe in improving the human condition, which means they're not using computers. Oh, I'm just kidding. They use computers a lot. That's just right at the top of their website, though. When I directed okay, next paper. Can we replace all or mostly all in-class teaching with educational games? This is my next column. And when I directed the development of the America's Army game, and parents discovered that their children knew everything about the U.S. Army, many parents asked me if it was possible to teach other curricula with games. And here is a part of America's Army where we go into a classroom and learn basic combat life-saving. It's figure 3. And this reaches all the way back to 2002 when America's Army 1.0 was released. In even in 2009, I gave a talk at the Educational Testing Service entitled How to Replace All Teachers with Game-Based Education. to an audience of some 500 teachers, most of whom agreed with me and not too many threw too many things at me. In this paper, I spoke about our experience with Zoom during the COVID-19 pandemic. And now that we've done the great big Zoom experiment during COVID-19 with teaching, we all now know that we don't necessarily need classrooms, that we can do almost everything over the wire with teaching in either synchronous or asynchronous fashion. We likely don't even need synchronous teaching, as many of our students this last year have been stuck in China, India, and other places overseas on a different time zone due to the xenophobic US government policy of demanding that international students, not physically in classrooms, stay out of the United States. So with Zoom, we learned that we could teach via video links in real time to a distant audience, and it became again clear to me that if we had the right budget and the right designers and game development team, that we could most certainly replace most all teaching with interactive games. The problem is the cost to do this and the will of the people of the United States to make this happen. There isn't the budget or the will, is what my column said. With recorded Zoom lectures being a lot cheaper or recorded YouTube videos, we could get close to replacing 80% of in-classroom PowerPoint presentations right now at very little cost. All right, the next column was entitled, Let's Rename Everything the Metaverse. In early 2022, it seemed like everyone working in 3D suddenly changed the name of what they were building to be a metaverse. We even had to come up with a plural for metaverse, metaversi. And before I wrote, let's now call everything the metaverse. The metaverse is a shared virtual space that people can move through and interact with using a personalized avatar as they pursue communication and commerce with like-minded virtual friends. Neil Stephenson created this notion and waxed elegantly on it in his 1992 book, Snow Crash. People who are building 3D games, 3D virtual environments, or anything related to 3D suddenly started using metaverse instead of what they were originally building under another name. It just seemed worth noting. Even one very large company renamed itself Meta to join the parade. One of the things, though, is that all the different metaversi currently cannot share your friends list, your avatar, or any in-game experience you have had. And this needs to be engineered in from the start for the metaverse to succeed, and it's still not there. We mostly just have walled gardens, is the message from this column. The one response I got from this column was from Charles Adelman, the CEO of XRDNA, whose focus is on XRDNA is XR plus AI platform that is built for the next generation of immersive experiences, communication, and visualization. All right, immersive experiences, XR, metaverse, with its core wayfinding, search, and indexing guide MOE, map of everything, and a patented volumetric domain and IP addressing system, XRDNA creates interoperability and unification across spatial and metaversal walled gardens. So XRDNA kind of wants to solve the interoperability problem. So eventually, there are not any walled gardens between metaversi, but there is a patented volumetric domain and IP addressing system in there, which they plan to place into a nonprofit somewhere, is my understanding. And I wish them the best of luck. And again, this is kind of like the walled gardens are on the left with the solid black line around them, and the open worlds are the ones with the dashed lines. And the open worlds share the 3D avatar, friends list, and whatever needs to come, and we call that a persona, all right? Read the original paper. Next column, we need something like Bell Labs for the games industry. As I stated many times, there's not really any large place for basic research in new technologies for games and game development. Work in these areas happens at various universities, usually universities divorced from having a game development degree program of any kind. In my career, I've created the research directions plan and or founded several research entities, including the Naval Postgraduate School's NPS Net Research Group. I founded it, drafted the research agenda, operated and raised the funding. USC's Institute for Creative Technologies. I created the operating plan and research agenda to found it 25 years ago. This is their 25th anniversary celebration coming next week. The Naval Postgraduate School's Modeling Virtual Environments Simulation Institute, I founded, drafted the research agenda, operated and raised the funding. So I've got a lot of experience in that. And I started building these research entities by reading uh, books and articles from very famous organizations, Bell Laboratories, the MIT Media Laboratory, and the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox PARC. All of these laboratories, institutes, and centers were places where computer scientists of my age dreamed of ending up. We all wanted to be at a place where there was sufficient funding and sufficient freedom to explore some basic ideas that could potentially change the world eventually. What I wanted to create was a research institute focused completely on the next generation technology for developing and building games. In Figure 5, I used a mind map to show the scope that I was thinking for this Bell Labs-like version of the Games Research Institute. I received many comments asking me where the Games Research Institute would be, but to this date, I still have not found an interested funding party. And there is the Games Research Institute with all of the different research areas, and you can go check this out in the original column. How do I get a position in the games industry, the FAQ? This column is one, I'm so happy I wrote this. Once I founded the games program at USC, the most often asked question became, how do I get a position in the games industry? Or more often, how do I get my son or daughter a position in the games industry? And if I tried to explain each of these queries individually, it usually turned into a 90-minute explanation what the program at USC looked like and how it funneled our students through the right courses into end of semester, fall and spring demo days that were attended by game industry hiring people there to see what games our students had built. This was an amazingly successful pathway for getting our students into positions in the games industry. My course rosters show that I have placed some 4,000 students into positions in the games and computing industries over 18.5 years at USC. I think at the end of, May 2016, I had a TA go and total up all the rosters, and it was something on the order of 600 different companies. Figure 6 shows what the games program ought to be really from the high level. USC, and what you'll see in there is there's a game art and design part of Figure 6, but USC's never created a game art and design program. But I put it in there because it's a placeholder for the future, and hopefully USC will make that happen. I still receive messages from computing industry people that have read this paper to help point their child to the right education direction for a career in the games industry. I also receive a large number of requests from parents who sent their children to a school without a games program, asking for help to get their child into a position in the games industry as well. I usually hand them this column and point them towards YouTube as well. There it is, the Game Development University, the Game Development Degree Program, a Game Design Degree Program, a Game Art Design Degree Program with a focus on concept art, 3D modeling, and game animation. And it looks a lot like what USC of the future will be. Weapons of Mass Distraction, the America's Army game at 20. This is the next column. In February of 2022, the United States Army decided to shut down the America's Army game after 20 years of support for the Army's recruiting efforts. And in the 20 years since the game was put online, I did something like 200 plus interviews about its development and its operation. With an era coming to an end, I thought maybe one more time I should detail why the Army wanted to build it. What were the internal discussions the development team had with the Army to make the game's impact on basically making the serious games field happen, and the discussion about the potential for the use of games for education. I wanted to collect into the column some of the most interesting and critical imagery from the project. I had collected much of this information inside of many different technical publications, but realized that putting out a commemorative column on the game to highlight some of the key decisions and experiences the development and operations team had with the game needed to be somewhere. This column and its companion YouTube videos are a great package of knowledge for the future desires of those interested in recruiting via online gaming. This column had a huge response. Many of the people involved in developing, operating, marketing, and playing the game sent me nice notes about the memory of the book. That felt great. The U.S. Army failed to meet its recruiting numbers after the game was taken offline in February 22, though. I saw an article quoting a general officer stating that perhaps the Army ought to get the game back online. I drafted an email to that general officer and did not receive any response. The cost of building a top 5 online game in May of 2000, March of 2004 was approximately $17 million. A top 5 game today is probably on the order of $150 million. So this is the article that came out at E3 on May 22nd, 2002, saying America's new message to young recruits, Uncle Sim wants you. This is a picture from America's Army 2.0, and this is the America's Army, the Pentagon video game shuts down after 20 years. Got to open a jar here. Wow.
Can't get
Can't get it.
Dang.
Hold on. Building a human intelligent metaverse. Next column. This column created a research plan for a computational human perception laboratory. And computational human perception has the potential to be the core of a human intelligent metaverse, a sensed world that interacts with our physical, emotion, and mental states. I cannot put all the illustrations in from that column. Figure 10 shows the research scope proposed for that laboratory, not unlike Stanford University's Human Perception Laboratory, but perhaps with a more of a computational focus. The column focused on creating a master's degree in computational human perception. So the next 2 illustrations show the syllabi for 2 potential courses, the biosignals, sensors, and modalities course, and the human behavior models course. We still have not seen anyone stand up this master's degree program, but I believe it has great potential, especially at a university that has a computer science focused games degree program. And this is the research directions for the computational human perception laboratory. This is topics for the biosignals, sensors, and modalities course. And this is topics for the human behavior models course. There are several other courses, and I didn't put them all in this. Go look at the original column. You'll see it all there. Patent litigation in the game space. I wrote this column for 2 reasons. One was to teach the reader how to draft a patent through an understanding of the component parts of a typical patent. And the second was to teach the reader a little bit about patent litigation, such that the reader could become a writer of patents that could survive litigation. I have a lot of experience as an expert in patent litigation, have been in some 49 cases of patent litigation for some 58 plus game and computing companies and some 36 law firms. And Figure 13 shows a distilled version of the various cases I've worked on from my personal perspective. I've had many attorneys read this article to think about hiring me as an expert witness for patent litigation, patent prosecution, intellectual property, or Federal Trade Commission cases. And attorneys that I've worked with before have read this and responded favorably, and I've consequently kept quite busy. So this is the scope of, my experience of working in patent litigation, across all of these different topics that come up. The most of them in the start were people who believe they invented client-server networking of games, and there's, I think, are 5 or 6 cases in that space. Next column, Metaverse University. The purpose of this column was to take my knowledge of what a game development university was and extend that into what a Metaverse University might look like. At the time I was drafting the column, it looked like our success in creating low-cost head-mounted displays was going to drive up the demand for hires in the metaverse creation industry. Unfortunately, Apple came out with their Vision Pro headset with a cost starting at $3,499 and basically destroyed most all interest in the metaverse development space. Had Apple thought about this a bit before they created such a costly device, they could have easily workshopped out that most people's fear is that they might drop their laptop off the dining table or desk onto the floor, destroying a $1,500 marvel of technology, with all those data moments lost in time, like tears in rain, time to die. Apple did not think through that putting the computer onto someone's head with the vision occluded might lead to a Blade Runner type kind of moment. the Metaverse University, most of the responses I've had from this column have been from the Middle East, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, places where there is wealth to support a focus on VR, AR, XR. None of those responses has resulted in the creation of Metaverse University, mostly just small programs of a single class that teaches 10 people how to build a Metaverse application in Fortnite. This is what the degree program would look like. Basically, if you take the games program I designed and turned it into Metaverse program, this is what it would look like. All right, the Call American Professor. In March of 2017, I was invited to the IEEE Virtual Reality Conference to receive the IEEE Virtual Reality Technical Achievement Award for fundamental work in virtual reality, networking, body tracking, and institutionalizing the application of virtual reality. I was asked to prepare an hour-long talk on how I got there in my career. And I wrote the 88 slides for that talk and arrived at IEEE VR to find that there were 4 other people in the 1-hour session with me, and I really only had 10 minutes for my talk. I used all 88 slides anyway and gave my entire talk in 10 to 12 minutes instead of an hour, and I must have seemed like someone on speed. Maybe I seem that way all the time. I decided later on to turn that talk into this column, and after I had used the original slides to give a 90-minute talk at the Naval Postgraduate School, figures 15 and 16 are part of that talk, which was on my biography as an American professor. I did receive a number of responses from former research colleagues that loved to reminisce about our successes in an earlier era of virtual reality. Figure 16 shows the report of an NRC committee that I chaired, Modeling and Simulation, Linking Entertainment and Defense. That study had huge impact as it moved defense simulation away from defense contractors with crazy large budgets to smaller contractors that started by using a commercial game engine. USC's Institute for Creative Technologies was created from a distillation of this report written by me at the request of the chief scientist of the U.S. Army, Mike Andrews. This is one of our great projects and Modeling and Simulation, Linking Entertainment Defense. Next column was, do we need universities anymore? Yeah, I keep writing these provocative columns about education. That's just because if you are inside of the tent, that's what you think about. The motivation for this column was provided by experience with Zoom and YouTube once again. The idea was, could we replace some significant part of in-class education, or at least the lecturing part, with online live lectures or recorded video of these lectures? Answer is yes. And you can probably replace about 80% of in-classroom PowerPoint lecturing in this fashion. And figure 17 shows one slide from the Shanghai Invisible School project, which smashes together ideas extracted from our Zoom experience with the ideas behind Apple's Genius Bars. Figure 18 shows a simpler structure of how we teach now and how we could teach in the future. And we all did this experiment during the COVID-19 pandemic and understand that this is how we could go if universities eliminated the socialization with other people part of the education that universities provide so well. That socialization is very important, by the way. Of course, I sent this to my dean and several former computer science department chairs, and I got zero response, of course, because all of their jobs depend on there being a school. And they probably looked at this and said, who is this guy? All right. I did hear back from the Shanghai Invisible School project people. They told me that their focus has turned to vocational education with respect to this project, and that they're building a school plant that can support 10,000 students working with tools, machine tools, with all educational support provided digitally, just like the original diagram. 3 of my former students are working in Shanghai on this effort. And this is the Invisible School project, and go to the original column and you can read about this. And this is figure 18, which is how we could teach in simpler fashion. Okay, next column, hubris, from the metaverse to ChatGPT to TikTok's time of tribulation. This column was a collection of 3 topics that were boiling around the time I was thinking about writing the article, the metaverse, ChatGPT, and TikTok. And with respect to the metaverse, I tried to deal with the perception that the metaverse had died a long overdue death, and tried to explain that it was the wheel of reincarnation effect that brought technology forward, only to be knocked down until a later time when the technology was perhaps better, cheaper, and better regarded so that it could be reincarnated again. See figure 19. ChatGPT had come out and it was the bomb diggity at the moment. I wrote that column, and large language models provide exciting results that look like everyone who invented some technology in the space was going to be considered for a Turing Award. We now know better, and the stock market has told us so. All right. The third part of that column was TikTok's time of tribulation. Came up when it became clear to everyone that the US Congress was not getting anything done, and that Congress needed a red flag event they could wave in front of us, a red flag such that, as TikTok, that they could potentially unify and attack and make them look like they're doing some work. With that attack, the lack of past appropriations could be buried under the "we killed TikTok" banner. Still not dead. I don't think it's going to die. I hope not. My wife spends an hour each evening with TikTok, and my daughter spends 2 hours picking out what TikToks for her to watch. The response that I received in this column were that perhaps the Congress people wanted to meet some of the influencers so that they could learn how to better campaign. All right, got it. Okay, this is figure 19 was 75 different head-mounted displays designed in China. All right. Next column, the metaverse is just a software layer. Kind of got off in this metaverse jag and then a generative AI jag. The purpose of this column was to point out with the perception that the metaverse is dying, that perhaps we just needed to consider the metaverse as a software layer instead of a piece of hardware. If we just made the metaverse a software layer, then we could participate in the metaverse with a head-mounted display, a flat screen television, or perhaps an Apple Vision Pro, a device introduced over a 2-hour presentation without the word metaverse ever being used. There were just a couple of responses to this column, most from friends who were acquiring Apple Vision Pros and asking me when I would get mine. Sniff, I still don't have. All right, this is what the article looks like. Games technology takes over the film industry. I drafted this column to record my experience interviewing to be chief scientist for one of the largest film or streaming studios in the city of Los Angeles. And what I learned right away is that none of the people I was interviewing with had ever drafted a position description for the chief scientist position. So they were trying to interview me without a position description. So they had no idea what to ask me. It was a very strange experience. So in typical form, I drafted the mind map in figure 21 and kicked it to the people I was interviewing with. And they all got excited. And I ended up doing 9 interviews with this studio. And at the end of the process, the HR candidate runner told me that I was the first candidate and that they needed to interview 9 more people before they were allowed to settle on someone. And I thought, right, 9 more people, 9 months each. What is that? 9 times, no, 3 months each, 9 times 3, 27 months. They're probably still working on it. So I took the mind map that I wrote and turned into this column to memorialize what a chief scientist ought to be thinking about for the modern film and streaming industry. I turned it into a YouTube. As always, and when the column came out in print, I kicked the PDF of the column to the HR candidate runner who reminded me that I had signed an NDA with that studio. I reminded him that I drafted their position description for them as they didn't seem to know what that position entailed. I suggested that perhaps I ought to send them an invoice for the 3 months of time the interview consumed. Anyway, the responses I received from the other studios was that they too were thinking about creating such a position. I haven't seen anybody advertise for it yet, though. Sometimes with writing, all you can do is get people to think, which is a big win. And this is what I drafted for the film studio: chief scientist scope, in story and concept, virtual production, post and in production, customer understanding and retention, and streaming and delivery. And this is a great plan. Who knows where they've gone? All right. How to create a games industry in your country. A frequently asked question to me is, how can a game development industry be created in some far distant country? The question has been asked of me by people in China, South Korea, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. I ended up spending quite a bit of time, probably 2.5 years, developing this plan for the Dubai Future Foundation, and the foundation that invests in new business directions for Dubai, businesses that people can work in when they completely run out of oil. They've actually run out of oil they can drill, but they have lots of it stored in big tanks. Figure 22 shows the component parts of that plan for developing game talent, game technology, and a game development community with connections to the global games industry. And the Dubai Future Foundation sent me an email on the 28th of December, 2023, indicating they needed a proposal from me by the 12th of January, 2024. So over the Christmas and New Year holidays, I had drafted the proposal and got it in early as I had all the pieces and parts, only to discover that the Dubai Future Foundation only had $1 million to invest in 4 proposals, which is just a ridiculously low amount of money for the task at hand. So I memorialized this plan in this column for other countries to consider. Figure 2 of that column has a completely revised original game development university plan that is excellent, and I recommend reading the original column 16. I'm still waiting for responses from other countries that wish to get into this space. Should there be any, you have my email. And this is what you need to build games in your country. It's actually a lot of work. It's not a small single class with 10 people in it. Next column, large language models and generative AI. Oh my. In this column, I wanted to start out by explaining the historical AI hype cycle that has infused the field of artificial intelligence since the beginning. I was worried that readers without the prior history of the field of AI would take generative AI too seriously. This is why my example of using Midjourney was to make Thanksgiving place cards. I wanted to show people that even in the simple task of making place cards for your dinner guests with Midjourney, that it was relatively easy to violate copyright. I try and make place cards for every meal. That is 5 or more dinner guests, by the way. Place cards designed individually using what I know about each guest. Most of the responses were from people that wanted to attend next year's Thanksgiving at my home in Carmel by the Sea. And here are the pictures of, what do the history of AI winters look like, and what is the hype cycle? You can go to the original column and read these. Next paper was today, generative AI is just a parlor trick. My motivation in this column was to show where we are now with generative AI and where we want to go using that technology. And that's figure 25. Again, my background is to draft plans that create research institutes. So the mind map of figure 25 shows the tools we need to get beyond the parlor trick we currently see with large language models. And by the way, it's my belief that these technical issues are going to be solved fast and get deployed even faster. And responses from readers to this paper asked me if I yet had access to OpenAI Sora, which I still do not. And this is figure 25, which is today, generative AI is just a parlor trick, and it's where we are now. We can create concept art, we can create short videos, where we want to go, and what do we have to do to get there, the research. So this is something worth looking at. Look at the original column. Next column was, can OpenAI Sora generate Pixar's Toy Story? And with this column, my motivation was to try and understand the computational requirements needed to use OpenAI Sora to generate the complete Pixar Toy Story film. The reason I chose Toy Story is that it is the first feature film made completely digitally. I imagined that if I needed access to the digital assets for this project, I could perhaps make a plea to Disney Pixar for access to try this out. Figure 26 shows my thoughts on how to come up with an amount of computation time to carry this out across the entire span of NVIDIA hardware from the A100 to the Blackwell 100. This paper had the strangest responses from my readers. Most people wanted to know how much power it would take to run the NVIDIA farm to do the computation. Now, that is perhaps something I need to put into a different column, as I will need to include air conditioning for that NVIDIA farm as well. And I'll take a look at it. One of my former students wants to help me write that column as well. He is the former senior patent counsel for Qualcomm. The readers were concerned primarily if we would end up with power brownouts with such computations. And I responded back indicating that Elon Musk has decided to move from California to Texas. Texas is the state of brownouts. He's moving SpaceX, X, forever known as Twitter, and XAI, his AI company, and he's purchasing something like 100,000 NVIDIA H100s for the computation infrastructure of the companies in Texas, and sizing for about 130 megawatts of power and cooling this year, and will increase to 500 megawatts over the next 18 months. So I guess he's building his own power plant somewhere there in Texas because they certainly don't have that as surplus at the moment. And this is how we do that computation with Toy Story using some simulations of what the particular hardwares take. Okay, my most recent column, which hasn't come out yet, is called Generative AI Changes the World, Maybe. And the grand promises of generative AI community point towards an industrial revolution event with large language models leading the way. And my motivation for this column was to talk a little bit about what industrial revolution means by way of having ChatGPT create the course syllabus for my readers on a course on industrial revolution. I also wanted to point out that with serious technology export restrictions being placed on generative AI capable compute hardware, that we were rapidly moving into Cold War 2.0 with China, and that it was easier to say put technology restrictions on than to actually carry out those restrictions. And this column is not yet out, so I do not yet have any comments on it. The PDF of the draft is on my website. You can go read it there, and so is the YouTube. And this is some of the thoughts I had on that paper. So 20 columns later, and I'm still writing. I hope you have read this far into this summary of my motivations for the previous 20 columns. I don't think people usually do this. I think Leslie Lamport was sort of the inspiration, by the way. If you go to Leslie Lamport's webpage, he has actually written a sentence or two on why he actually wrote each paper that he's ever published, which I find very fascinating. It helps you think about how does he think. We really are trying to get guest column submissions for the alternate months in IEEE Computer and the months in which I do not write. So if you have an excellent title and abstract, send it my way so I can approve it and have you join this never-ending journey. 20 columns later. These are the references. I think this is probably a really super bad form, but I think the first 20 references in this paper are all single authored by me. Sorry about that. I just wanted you to have what are the columns I am talking about. And then some of the other references as well. And a reference from Blade Runner, the movie, and Stanford University's Human Perception Laboratory link, and Charles Adelman's LinkedIn page. And on acknowledgments, I wish to thank all the people that have read my columns over the last 3 years and sent me comments and or suggestions for next columns, and even more, those who send me future columns. Have a great day. This has been the Games Column by Michael Zaida. I'm going to exit now, stop sharing, and you can see me. You can see my crazy background here. Anyway, have a great day. This has been the Games Column.